In at 5, open water. In 1998, an American couple, Tom and Eileen, went scuba diving with a tour group near Australia's Great Barrier Reef. However, they did not return. Nearing the end of the session, the diving company miscounted the number of divers on board, abandoning the couple in the middle of the ocean, only to realize the grave mistake they made 2 days later. By this point, Tom and Eileen were gone, the only remains being a diver's slate with an SOS message that read, Monday, January 26, 1998, 8 AM. To anyone who can help us, we have been abandoned. Please help us. Come to rescue us before we die. Help. Now, the film that this story inspired was the 2003 horror Open Water, directed by Chris Kentis. It follows the same premise, 2 American divers abandoned at sea and forced to survive. Not just the deadly waters, but the creatures within it. If you have a fear of water, open spaces, sharks, or have abandonment issues, I don't recommend you watch this film.
In our 4th spot, we have the Smiley Face Killer. The Smiley Face Killer is a real-life, unidentified serial killer whose trademark is to leave a smiley face in graffiti at the scene of every crime. Police started to investigate this after the 1997 death of Patrick McNeil. Patrick was a university student who was later found floating in the East River in New York City. His death was originally declared as an undetermined drowning, but 2 detectives didn't think that this was the case. Upon doing more investigating, they found that Patrick was actually stalked, abducted, and bound for a period of time before being murdered. This case and another similar case to this one triggered their investigation and led them to create this smiley face killer theory. They have found that around 335 cases of suspicious drownings could be linked to this killer. In fact, they believe that it's not just one killer, but a gang of killers. Their trademark is to leave the graffitied smiley face close to the scene of every crime. The killers also seem to target athletic, successful students who are well liked by their peers. All victims also seem to be around the same age, are typically white males, and are drinking the night of their disappearance. Later, they are found drowned with the smiley face nearby. There's just too many eerie similarities for the deaths not to be related. Well, the 2012 film Smiley Face Killers was inspired by these serial killings. The film opens with the murder of 2 victims. The victims are completely unrelated. The only thing that links the 2 together is the smiley face graffitied near the bodies. The film then goes on to follow a character named Jake, a university student that feels like he's being stalked by someone. He believes he's the next victim of the smiley face killers.
In at 3, Psycho. During the late 1950s, a grave robber named Ed Gein killed women and unearthed corpses in Plainfield, Wisconsin. He gained infamy after authorities discovered he was fashioning trophies and keepsakes from the bodies he'd murdered and exhumed. From a wastebasket made of human skin to bowls made of human skulls, his crimes were repugnant. He was found guilty in 1968 and was remanded to a psychiatric facility. He would later die in 1984 from cancer-induced liver failure at the age of 77. Now, there are a handful of films inspired by the crimes of Ed Gein, but the most notable is arguably the 1960s psychological horror, Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The film follows Marion Crane, a secretary seeking shelter at a secluded motel, and suffers a grim fate at the hands of a delusional killer, Norman Bates. The film was a trailblazer for the slasher genre, and during its release depicted unprecedented acts of violence and sexuality, because seeing a woman and a man sharing the same bed was completely unfounded, apparently. Anyway, the film went on to be arguably Hitchcock's most successful film, even resulting in 3 sequels, a remake, a made-for-television spin-off, and a prequel television series. Only one of those we're allowed to discuss, the others should be burned and never spoken of again.
And at number 2, A Nightmare on Elm Street. In the 1970s, a series of newspaper articles were printed in the Los Angeles Times about a group of Southeast Asian refugees who were suffering disturbing nightmares and were refusing to sleep after fleeing to the United States to escape the war and genocide in Cambodia and Vietnam. A few of the refugees died in their sleep, and the name Asian Death Syndrome was quickly coined. It oddly only affected men between the ages of 19 and 57, and doctors summed it up as a sudden unexplained death syndrome, or Brugada syndrome. Craven stated that the newspapers never correlated the 3 articles, and say that the third one was the son of a physician. He was about 21. Everybody in his family said almost exactly these lines: "You must sleep. He said, "No, you don't understand. I've had nightmares before. This is different." Sound familiar? Well, this quickly inspired Craven to start writing up his masterpiece, A Nightmare on Elm Street, a film that follows a group of teenagers plagued by the same nightmare. A man covered in burns and wielding knives for fingers, Freddy Krueger. In the film, the dreams that the teens have come to life. If Freddy slashes you in your nightmare, you ain't coming back. I doubt this is what happened to the refugees, but it's still a pretty creepy theory. The film was such a hit it resulted in 6 sequels, a Friday the 13th crossover, and a 2010 remake of the original, which, just ignore most of those just like the last number and only focus on the first, because that one's the good one.
Please, God.
This is God.
And finally,
in at number 1, The Exorcist. In 1949, the Washington Post headlined an article, "Priest frees Mount Rainier boy reportedly held in devil's grip." It went on to detail a rite of exorcism on the boy with the pseudonym Roland Doe. The priests who administered the exorcism reported that the boy spoke in tongues, as well as reported the bed shaking and hovering above the ground. The exorcism was one of only 3 that the Catholic Church officially sanctioned in the United States. William Peter Blatty was inspired by the article. He immediately began to write his novel, and following that, the screenplay for The Exorcist.
ooh. The film itself follows a young girl, Reagan, not to be confused with Ronald Reagan. Don't put that in there, that's not funny. Who, after playing with a Ouija board and communicating with an entity named Captain Howdy, becomes possessed. The film is a distressing watch as we witness the young girl walk backwards on her hands down the stairs, stab herself repeatedly with a crucifix in her lady bits, and even twist her head completely around. An exorcism is administered, and we watch on as 2 priests are tormented by the demon within the child. William Friedkin, the director of the film, discussed the true events that inspired the movie, stating that maybe one day they'll discover what happened to the young man, but back then it was only curable by an exorcism. His family weren't even Catholics, they were Lutheran. They started with doctors and then a psychiatrist, and then psychologists, and then they went to their minister who couldn't help them. So they wound up with the Catholic Church.
For those who have seen the film, you'll know this is the same journey Reagan goes on, successfully adding to the film's fear factor. When no credible doctor can come up with any feasible explanation, and the only cure is an exorcism, it's a frightening feeling for the audience. It makes it feel like this could happen to anyone. Ooh. Back to the newspaper article though. Friedkin lastly went on to state it's pretty out on a limb for a national newspaper to put on its front page, but you're not going to see that on the front page of an intelligent newspaper unless there's something there.
Number 5, The Conjuring. Now, if you're a fan of this channel, no doubt you know all about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famed demonologists with a storied career in investigating the paranormal and unknown. You probably knew as well that The Conjuring was based on real events, but how much do you know about the real story that inspired the mega hit? Well, just like the film, in 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Rhode Island with their 5 daughters. Almost as soon as they could start unpacking their things, however, they began to notice bizarre happenings around the home. It all started pretty small, just weird little things. Objects moving, a broom being found in a room different from where it was left. The girls would say that they'd see spirits floating around the halls, but you know how kids are. The mother, Carolyn, researched the house's history to see if there was anything that suggested it was a ground for spiritual activity. She discovered that the house had been home to one family for 8 generations. Not that scary. She also discovered that many members of this family all passed away under mysterious circumstances. Pretty scary. Now, just like the film, they learned at one point the house was owned by a woman named Bethesda, who was thought to be a Satanist and a witch. One of Perron's daughters thought that Bethesda's spirit threatened her mother's presence. And just like in the films, the Warrens found their way to the Perrons and performed a seance to try and speak to Bethesda, and claimed they saw Carolyn Perron speaking in tongues during the seance. Now, where the movie differs slightly is that in the film, Ed Warren performs an exorcism and heroically saves the family and cleanses the house. But in the real story, the Warrens were sent away because the Perrons were worried about Carolyn's mental health. They also did not perform an exorcism, as Lorraine Warren said it wouldn't have been appropriate for them as they weren't members of the ministry. The Perrons stayed in the house until 1980, when eventually the hauntings started to go silent. This might be one of the few times a horror movie based on a true story had a happier ending than the real story. Love horror movies? Me too. Stick around at Top 5 Scary for more stuff every day. let's creep on creeping on.
In at number 4, Child's Play. In 1909, Robert Eugene Otto claimed a servant of his family had placed a curse on his childhood doll, and that it would go from room to room, banging on doors, knocking over furniture, and would even conduct conversations. The doll was left in the attic until Otto's death in 1974, and when new owners moved in, it wasn't long until they themselves started questioning the mysteries surrounding the dolls. The doll, famously known as Robert the Doll, is displayed at Key West Fort East Martello Museum. Now, of course, we all know the film in question that this devious doll inspired was Child's Play, aka the creepy, overall-wearing, knife-wielding Chucky. Child's Play is a slasher released in 1988 and directed by the legendary Tom Holland. It follows a serial killer, Charles Lee Ray, on the run from homicide detectives, and when he is fatally shot in a toy shop, he uses a voodoo spell to transfer his soul into a good guy's doll, thus creating Chucky. Take a look.
Number 3. The Exorcism. Now, The Exorcism is an iconic horror movie and legendary story adapted from a novel. Not many people know that the novel and the film were based on a real-life exorcism of a boy named Roland Doe, or so we think, as his real name has never been cleared up. Living in Maryland, Roland lived a quiet, sheltered life, relying on his aunt for company, a noted occultist, and fascinated with the spirit world. She gifted him a Ouija board at a young age. After his aunt passed, it wasn't long before the family home started to experience a series of strange paranormal events. Like it always does, it started a bit small, just objects moving around the house or water leaking from all the pipes in the house, but then eventually it started to ramp up. It seemed like Roland had become possessed. He started to fall mysteriously ill, and red scratches appeared all over the boy's body. The family was put in contact with the clergy, who suggested they needed an exorcist to help them. Now, unfortunately, although in the film, Reagan only needed one exorcism, albeit a brutally rough one, Roland wouldn't be nearly that lucky. Roland was exorcised round the clock for weeks and weeks. Now, he never turned green and vomited up pea soup, nor did he ever twist his head all the way around, but they did report that he would growl gutturally in a voice that wasn't his. He would speak Latin, and even threatened the priests by saying that Satan had taken control of his soul. On one occasion, during an extreme exorcism, he broke free of his restraints when he was tied to a mattress and managed to slash at one of the priests using the buckle, similar to Reagan attacking her exorcisers multiple times in the film. After weeks of battling, eventually like a miracle, Roland woke and said he saw a vision of Saint Michael and Satan battling for his soul, and after that, he was freed. None of the priests were slain like in the film, and luckily after this harrowing experience, Roland was able to live a quiet, normal life and tried his best to live under the radar, not wanting any more attention than he'd already had. After reading about it in a newspaper, author William Blatty was fascinated by the case and inspired to write about an exorcism of his own, which would then become The Exorcism, and then the movie was made, and well, the rest is pretty much history. Number 2. Annabelle. Another famous story from the Warrens' legacy. We knew we'd be seeing them again. Based around probably the most famous and recognizable haunted item in the Warrens' Museum of the Occult, Annabelle. The real Annabelle is a cursed Raggedy Ann doll that was one of the first cases the Warrens ever investigated. Now, the real Annabelle already looks pretty unsettling and isn't the kind of thing I would ever give to a child, but her Hollywood glow-up made her even more terrifying. The story of the film and the legend of the real Annabelle differ pretty greatly though. In the film, Annabelle is given off as a gift from a husband to his pregnant wife, whereas in reality, the Raggedy Ann doll was given to a nursing student, Donna, by her mother as a small gift. The film does feature Donna and her roommate Angie speaking to the Warrens at the beginning, describing their experiences with the doll. That's kind of where the two stories stop being the same and start differing greatly. The original story, Donna claims that the doll would move around their home, appearing in random places, occasionally having red stains on her no one could explain. She would complain that her and her roommate would wake up covered in scratches, again, no one could explain. They said they would find notes scrawled in red writing across the home, reading cryptic things like "Help us" or "Help Lou," the name of Donna's roommate's fiance. The most extreme thing any of them ever reported was that Donna's fiance claims one night while staying over, he felt something crawling on his leg, and when he looked to see what it was, he saw Annabelle on his leg and claims the doll leapt up at him. He woke up the next morning completely unsure if what he had experienced was real or not. Now from there, they contacted a medium to arrange a seance to see if they were dealing with something truly evil. From here, the Warrens were put in contact to help them and take Annabelle off their friends. While the real story is no doubt spine-chilling, the movie got a lot more dramatic, involving satanic cults, deaths, house fires, and a whole lot more. But still, I probably wouldn't want to spend any time near the real Annabelle, just in case. Number 1. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven was a master of horror. I don't think it is completely fair to call him a visionary and an icon of the craft, giving us not just one, but two legendary classic horror movie franchises, A Nightmare on Elm Street and the satirical horror movie series Scream. Freddy Krueger is larger than life as a horror icon. He's incredibly popular, appearing in several of his own movies, even coming into some of Jason's movies, starring in a couple video games as a playable character in Mortal Kombat and Dead by Daylight. A horribly burned dream-invading ghoul, manifesting people's worst fear and attacking them in a place no one can help them and no one can believe them. He's terrifying, but by gosh do we love him. It's no wonder Freddy's had such scary staying power. But I bet you didn't know Wes Craven was inspired by a real-life horror story for Freddy. Don't worry, there's no real-life groundskeepers that were cast into a furnace, at least I think. Wes Craven was reading the LA Times one morning and he read an article that pierced him and stuck with him. It was about a refugee family that fled to the United States for the fear of their lives. The son of the family was plagued by nightmares and said that he was too afraid to sleep. When he finally found himself falling asleep in the middle of the night, he was screaming and passed away during a nightmare. This spoke to Wes Craven deeply, who sympathized that he was too afraid to sleep and no one would listen to his worries, and saddened at the idea of something that would attack someone while they were vulnerable and away from the protection of supervisors and guardians. From that tragic story, Freddy Krueger was born as a manifestation of this horrible concept that affected Wes Craven so deeply, trying to conjure up the most evil thing he could think of. Since then, Freddy's become a pop culture icon and is not without his legions of fans, but few know the true story behind the iconic slasher.
Starting off this countdown, we have Winchester. The 2018 horror thriller film Winchester surrounds Sarah Winchester, who is played by Helen Mirren, a widow haunted by multiple ghosts in her massive mansion. This whole movie is based on the real-life story of Sarah Winchester, who believed she was cursed by the people killed by her family's rifles, the Winchester rifles. These ghosts would talk to her, and they told her that if she ever stopped building her home, then she would die. Others believe that Sarah wasn't actually haunted, but she was just overcome by grief, guilt, and mental illness issues. Either way, her house was always under construction. By 1906, it was 7 stories high with about 90 rooms. Sarah knew she seemed crazy, but she didn't want to stop building her house, for fear that the ghosts would kill her. In fact, the way that her house was designed was to also trick these ghosts. Like, she had stairways that led to nowhere, or doorways that would open to a 2-story drop. In the end, she had 160 rooms, 47 stairways, 17 chimneys, 13 bathrooms, 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, and 6 kitchens. The list goes on and on. You get it. Her house was massive. Nowadays, the home is open for tours and apparently is still haunted by the victims of the Winchester rifles.
Number 4. The Amityville Horror. Another haunted house story, and wouldn't you know it, another one attached to Ed and Lorraine Warren. If there was a haunted house in the Midwestern United States in the 1970s and they made a movie about it, well, by gum, those two names will come up a lot. They were very busy. The Amityville Horror has been made into a movie a few times, first in 1979 and again in 2005, if you can remember that terrible period when Hollywood was dredging up every single horror franchise and rebooting them terribly. Both movies are based on a real-life famous haunting, however, and while details vary between the films pretty wildly, let's see how they stack up against the original case. In 1973, a man named Ronald DeFeo slayed his family in a brutal crime, claiming that he had heard voices that had commanded him to do it, and there was some entity in the house. 13 months later, the Lutz family bought the house. The realtors had warned them about the house's grisly past, but it didn't bother them. You know how the housing market is. A friend of the family told them that it would be wise to have the house blessed, since there could still be evil inside the walls. After the family moved in, they described all sorts of paranormal wrongdoings going on. Green viscous slime coming up the staircases, voices speaking out to them, telling them to get out, flies all over the house, and the family even seeing wild things like specters. Now that's all pretty bad, but the film adaptations really take it up to the extreme. In the films, the Lutz family faces spirits directly, seeing ghosts, the father even gets possessed and attacks the family dog. Now, nothing this extreme happened in the actual haunting case, but there was a photo that was released that appears to show a ghostly boy walking across a staircase. But there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not it's legitimate, or whether or not anything involving the haunting was legitimate at all, as there are many who feel that it was faked by the Warrens and hyped up a little bit to try and make it a much more interesting story so they could sell books or movies. Well, real or not, it definitely worked, as the book was a smash hit and there have been dozens of movies since, meaning we're not leaving Amityville anytime soon.
Coming in at number 3, we have The Silence of the Lambs. A classic horror movie, if I do say so myself. If you haven't seen this movie, then, you know, get on it. But basically, it follows Clarice, an FBI trainee who is trying to locate the serial killer Buffalo Bill. She then has to use Hannibal Lecter, a cannibal and serial killer, to get some insight on this case. Well, according to the writer Thomas Harris and John Douglas, the FBI special agent who consulted on this film, real-life serial killers Ted Bundy and Ed Gein were both inspirations for this story. Ted Bundy inspired the movie in a number of ways. For starters, the relationship between Clarice and Hannibal was inspired by Ted Bundy's relationship with his criminology professor and profile, Bob Keppel. Bundy helped him investigate the Green River serial killings in Washington, while Bundy was a serial killer himself. Not only that, but in the film there's a scene where Buffalo Bill fakes having an injured arm to convince a young woman to help him load a couch into his van. And then when she does, he kidnaps her. Well, this was inspired by Ted Bundy, who would fake having a broken arm while carrying some books. He then would drop the books and then convince women to help him carry the books to his car or his house. Then we have Ed Gein. Well, Ed was a serial killer who would skin his victims and make clothes from the corpses. Just like how Buffalo Bill would create this skin suit from his victims and then he would, wear it. In our second spot, we have The Conjuring. Now, I'm sure you guys all know that the Conjuring series is based on the real-life cases of Ed and Lorraine Warren. With The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It being released soon, I thought we should talk about the real-life case that inspired this particular movie. This film is about the real-life trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson, the very first trial in which demonic possession was used as a defense. On November 24th, 1981, 19-year-old Arne Johnson fatally stabbed his landlord, Alan Bono. So it all started when Johnson's brother-in-law, David, started acting differently. He said a man with big black eyes and a thin face with animal features was controlling him. He got more and more violent and he started to kick, bite, spit, and swear, and he also had multiple seizures. Sometimes he would even talk in strange voices. That's when Ed and Lorraine Warren were brought in and declared that he was possessed. So then Johnson went on to taunt the demon, telling it to stop bothering David and to take him instead. Johnson also apparently went to the spot where David got possessed, which was an old well, and he claimed to see a demon hiding in the well. The demon then possessed Johnson and was apparently responsible for stabbing the landlord, or so he claims. Who's excited to watch the movie though? Hit that like button if you are, I know I am. And in our number 1 spot, we have The Watcher. The 2016 film The Watcher is about a young couple that move into a new home, only to find out that the home comes with a very creepy guest. They end up being tormented by someone who refers to themselves as The Watcher. Things end up getting so bad that they have to flee, leaving their dream home behind. Well, this is inspired by true events. In 2014, a family bought a $1.3 million home in New Jersey. But before they even got to move into this house, they started getting creepy letters from The Watcher. When they moved in, the letters only got worse. These letters talked about what the family was doing, proving to them that someone was truly watching them and stalking their every move. Here are some creepy things the letters have said. And I quote, "This home has been the subject of my family for decades. I am the watcher and have been in control of the house for the better part of 2 decades now. I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. All the windows and doors in the house allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house." And then another letter referred to the new owner's children and asked, Will the young bloods play in the basement? And have they found out what's in the walls yet? All these letters made the family terrified. They ended up hiring investigators and set up cameras, but the watcher was never caught. As a result, they decided to move out of their home and sell it for a loss. But they did end up filing a lawsuit against the previous owners of the house for failing to disclose the watcher that kept threatening them. Apparently, the previous owners got letters from the watcher as well. To this day, police have never caught the watcher, which makes this film that more terrifying.